Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto's fox-style training united him with Tsunade, Mabui, and Femme Kyuubi, Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Jiraiya was not happy at all. Originally Jiraiya had been on his way to Wave Country in order to follow up some money trails that his spy network had detected. However, Jiraiya had that little spy mission on hold when he stumbled across Team 7 heading towards Wave's W.L. The old Sannin had decided against revealing himself to the team, and instead he had been discreetly following them. In Jiraiya's opinion, Kakashi was an abysmal genin team instructor. What was that Cyclops thinking when he decided to continue the mission after the demon brothers tried to kill the bridge builder? At the very least Kakashi should have called for backup. Thanks to Kakashi's showboating, Jiraiya had nearly been forced to reveal himself during that little fight with Zabuza. And to make matters even worse in Jiraiya's mind, Kakashi was just introducing his genin to Tree Climby. That was something they should have been taught during their first week as genin. Needless to say, Jiraiya was not amused with the antics of his number one fan. Kakashi might be one of the strongest ninjas currently living in Konoha, but that didn't necessarily mean he was suited to teach. However, even though Jiraiya wasn't happy with Kakashi, he was even less thrilled with the rest of Team 7. The Uchiha's personality was just a bit too much like Orochimaru's when the Sannin were genins for Jiraiya's comfort. Sakura was still too much of a fangirl in her outlook and that one the type of girl that could turn Jiraiya off. As for Naruto, well that was complicated. On the one hand, Naruto was very determined to succeed and was too stubborn to give up on anything. But on the other hand, the boy was too hyper and seemed to let information pass through one ear and out the other. Seriously, didn't the kid pay any attention in class? All in all it seemed to Jiraiya that Naruto had stamina, unpredictability, and sheer determination going for him. It was obvious that it would take a lot of work to get Naruto to become a great ninja like the kid wanted to become. A part of Jiraiya just wanted to leave Naruto alone for now and let Kakashi deal with the brat. After all, it was Kakashi's responsibility to ensure that Naruto learned how to be a decent ninja. Jiraiya quickly realized what he thinking and smacked himself. Kakashi obviously wasn't going to cut it as a teacher for Naruto or the brat wouldn't be in his current condition. Something had to be done, but what? Jiraiya couldn't just poach Naruto from Kakashi. Besides the fact that stealing a student was heavily frowned on, Jiraiya didn't want to commit himself to the time and energy of taking on a new student. However, he couldn't leave his godson in this state and hope for the best. For the next several hours Jiraiya watched as Naruto tried to get the hang of tree climbing. Finally Jiraiya figured out the answer after Naruto fell asleep from exhaustion. In a nonchalant manner, Jiraiya whipped out a few scrolls and books from one of his summoning scrolls. Jiraiya then placed the scrolls and books on Naruto's chest. Next the Toad Sannin pulled out his notebook, wrote a note, and then he stuck the note on top of the scrolls. After that Jiraiya looked over his work and muttered, "Don't disappoint me, brat. Show me that you're willing to take the next step." Naruto groggily started to wake up when the sun first started to rise in the sky. As Naruto raised his hand to rub the sleep from his eyes his elbow knocked over the stack of scrolls. When Naruto heard the scrolls fall he muttered, "Huh? What's going on?" Once his vision cleared up, Naruto noticed the messed up pile of scrolls that were at his side. Without thinking at all Naruto practically shouted out, "Where did these come from?" Since Naruto couldn't figure out how those scrolls and books got there, he simply decided to randomly pick one and start reading. The chosen manuscript happened to be a book on chakra that was titled 101 Ways to Use Chakra for Dummies. At first Naruto wanted to chuck the book since it seemed to be one of those theory books that he could never get. But then Naruto remembered that tree walking was a method of using chakra and there was the chance that the book contained cool tricks like that. 101 Ways to Use Chakra for Dummies captured Naruto's attention from the get-go. The book was written in an easy-to-follow manner that explained chakra in a manner that Naruto could understand. Unlike the lectures at the academy, this book was able to catch and hold Naruto's attention. Amazingly, Naruto was so caught up in what the text was telling him that he didn't skip to a chakra exercise as soon as the book mentioned them. Naruto was so engrossed in the book that he didn't notice Kakashi come out of the house and approach. Naturally, Kakashi was a little worried about the book and scrolls surrounding Naruto. The boy hadn't brought them with him, and Kakashi knew that neither of his other students would let Naruto borrow a book. Just as Kakashi was about to confiscate the book in Naruto's hand, Kakashi noticed the note that was lying on the ground. After picking up and reading Jiraiya's note, Kakashi said, "Naruto, do you know where these books and scrolls came from?" Quote. The blonde genin looked up and replied, no, Kakashi. Does it really matter where the books came from? Kakashi let out a small sigh and tried to enlighten his foolish student. Yes, Naruto, it does matter. You've got to look underneath the underneath. These books could have been planted by an enemy as a trap. Luckily, these were left by an ally of the village who was passing through, so it's okay to read them. Next time, Naruto, please use your head. Naruto shrugged his shoulders, nodded his head, and then said, understood. But Kakashi, why would anyone set a trap with books? Wouldn't ramen be better bait for a trap? Kakashi decided to not dignify that last comment and left Naruto alone to read his book. After all, it wasn't like Naruto would apply what was in those books in real life, and Kakashi was happy to not have Naruto bugging him for jutsus. It took Naruto most of the day to read through 101 Ways to Use Chakra for Dummies. As soon as Naruto finished the last page of the book, he looked around and screamed out, "What? I blew off the whole day. Great. Just great. Now I'll have to work twice as hard to catch up on my training." Before Naruto could get up, Kakashi suddenly appeared in front of Naruto and said, "Hold on there, Naruto. You're going straight inside the house. It wouldn't be wise to spend 2 nights out here in a row. Now collect your things and head in." Naruto started to grumble about not being able to practice, but he did as he was told. There was no way he'd let Sakura get the idea that he was an immature child by disobeying Kakashi's command. When Naruto and Kakashi entered the house, Sasuke and Sakura were already sitting down at the table for dinner. Dinner was a fairly quiet affair since Naruto was sitting off to the end of the table silently pouting about not getting any training in. None of the other members wanted to hear Naruto complain about missing out on training, so they kept their voices down and didn't mention anything remotely like training. Once dinner was over, Kakashi had Naruto and Sasuke go to their room and told them to get plenty of sleep for their training tomorrow. This left Naruto with a bit of a problem. He wasn't tired enough to go to sleep yet since he hadn't spent the day training. For a second, Naruto thought about sneaking out for some late-night training, but then he remembered that Sakura wouldn't like it if he disobeyed Kakashi. Since Naruto couldn't train, he started to rack his brain to figure out what he could do until he got tired enough to go to bed. At first, Naruto came up with the idea of talking to Sasuke to pass the time. True, Naruto didn't really want to talk to Sasuke, but it wasn't like Sakura would like him interrupting her beauty sleep. Unfortunately for Naruto, Sasuke had already fallen asleep, and he knew better than to try and wake Sasuke up once the Uchiha was asleep. Naruto had tried that once a few days ago, and his butt had discovered that Sasuke thought that a kunai made a good substitute teddy bear. So, Naruto was left with only one option to keep from going bored: reading. Needless to say, Naruto wasn't too thrilled about reading, since that was why he hadn't gotten any practice in today. However, boredom eventually forced Naruto to pick one of the books that he had received and read them. This time Naruto looked at the titles and settled on a scroll that was labeled 1001 different ninjutsu you should know or watch out for. At first Naruto was ecstatic because the scroll had dozens of high-level jutsus listed. However, when Naruto started to read the higher-level jutsus, he discovered that the scroll only described those jutsus in general terms. Sure, the scroll allowed you to know what the higher-level jutsus did so that you could recognize it being used against you, but Naruto didn't want that. He wanted to learn how to do all of these cool jutsus. Naruto was beginning to think about pitching the scroll when something in the Shadow Clone's description caught his eye. After reading the description again, Naruto scratched his head and said, "Huh. The person using the Shadow Clone jutsu learns whatever his Shadow Clones learn. Wait a second, if this is correct, then I could create a whole army of Shadow Clones and I'll learn everything faster than Sasuke. As soon as that thought entered Naruto's mind, he continued on reading, trying to see what other tricks about shadow clones the scroll contained. For the rest of the week, the forest around Tsunade's house was infested by a swarm of Naruto's shadow clones. Now, using shadow clones in this manner can't grant the user any physical benefit. In order to get physically stronger, Naruto would have toughed it out and put himself in a physical conditioning regime. However, since chakra control was a mental process, Naruto was able to use his shadow clones to work on the tree walking exercise. While the clones were trying to go back to the trees, the original Naruto spent his time working on some of the jutsus that were written on the 1001 different ninjutsu you should know or watch out for scroll. It turned out that there were a few jutsus on the scroll that had instructions in addition to the descriptions. None of these jutsus were above C rank, but Naruto was so happy about learning new jutsus that he didn't have time to complain about the other jutsus he couldn't learn just yet. Of course, Naruto completely disregarded the D and E rank jutsus and just focused in on the available C rank jutsus. However, there was one small snag with Naruto's plan to learn the C rank jutsus. Since the scroll was originally made in Konoha, it only explained those moves that Konoha ninjas USUA LLY used. That meant that most of the C-rank jutsus were fire-style jutsus, and there was no way Naruto was going to learn one of those. After all, how could he possibly prove himself to Sakura if it looked like he was copying Sasuke? Luckily for Naruto's ego, Jiraiya had penciled in the instructions for a few C-rank wind jutsus. When Naruto had read about those jutsus, he just knew that they were perfect for him. After all, wind jutsus were big, strong, and made sure that your enemy remembered that you kicked their butt. Sure, there weren't a whole lot of wind jutsus in the scroll, but Naruto knew that he'd have them down by the time Zabuza came back for round 2. The rest of Team 7 had mixed feelings about Naruto's new training regime. While a part of Sakura was curious about what Naruto was doing, the dominant part of the pink-haired girl's psyche was happy that Naruto wasn't bugging her. Sasuke was also curious about Naruto's training, but the last Uchiha preferred to leave Naruto alone. Since Naruto could never beat him, Sasuke figured the training would hopefully make Naruto less of a hindrance than he currently was. As for Kakashi, he was just happy that Naruto was improving without him having to hold the boy's hand every step of the way. However, Kakashi had made some changes in how the team was running. For instance, he imposed a strict curfew after which no one could leave the house, and he had Naruto set some perimeter traps. It was completely unacceptable that someone had been able to get that close to the house without someone knowing. If it had been an enemy instead of a friend, then Team 7 could have been slaughtered. That was one mistake that Kakashi wasn't planning on making again anytime soon. About 10 days after Jiraiya left those scrolls to Naruto, Zabuza showed up for a rematch. The first sign that Zabuza had arrived was the thick mist that suddenly rolled in from the far end of the bridge. As soon as the first signs of the mist appeared, Kakashi's eye narrowed and he called out, "Sakura, guard Tazuna. Naruto, Sasuke, form a line between Sakura and me. If Zabuza's partner shows up, you two will have to delay him until I finish off Zabuza." Naruto and Sasuke quickly glanced at each other and slowly nodded in sync. They might not like each other and would rather be fighting by themselves, but somewhere deep inside their brains they knew that they'd have to depend on each other to win. After the brief pact of comradeship was made, Naruto and Sasuke turned their attention to the smaller form they saw in the mist. That shadowy form had to be their target, and both of them were eager to fight. Sakura was mentally a mess as she took her assigned spot next to Tazuna. On the one hand, she was happy that she wasn't on the front line of the fight. But, on the other hand, she didn't like the idea of Naruto backing Sasuke up. After all, Naruto would just be a big target and Sasuke would have to work twice as hard to defend himself and Naruto. Haku looked at Naruto and Sasuke, trying to figure out how he should handle the two of them. It was obvious to Haku that in terms of physical skill, Sasuke was the bigger threat. However, Haku remembered from Zabuza's first fight with the duo that he couldn't discount Naruto. While Naruto was more unrefined than Sasuke, the blonde's unpredictability was enough to put him at about the same T-rate level. The battle of the students opened with Haku throwing a spread of Senbon needles towards Naruto and Sasuke. Naturally, both boys dodged the needles, though Sasuke's doge was a lot more graceful than Naruto's. Haku followed his opening attack by jumping towards the duo, landing on his hands, and delivered a head kick to both genin. Naruto and Sasuke quickly recovered from Haku's opening combo and immediately retaliated. Sakura and Tazuna watched on in silent shock as the three boys entered a taijutsu battle to the death. Haku had quickly caught on to the fact that Naruto and Sasuke weren't used to fighting with a partner in close corners. Thus he was forcing the boys into close combat by getting in their faces. Since Haku was always too close to either Naruto or Sasuke, the other couldn't attack Haku with a jutsu. However, things weren't all peachy for Haku. While Zabuza had trained Haku to fight multiple opponents, Zabuza had only taught Haku how to fight opponents who used similar styles. Haku simply couldn't keep track of both of his opponents and predict both of their wildly different attack patterns. Slowly, but surely, the small shallow cuts and the glancing fist blows that Haku received started to add up. It was obvious to Haku that if he didn't do something soon, then he might slip up and either of his opponents could land a fatal blow. Haku gracefully swirled away from Naruto's attempt to punch him in the back of the head, and Zabuza's apprentice rapidly went through a series of hand signs. The instant Haku finished signing, a giant dome comprised of ice mirrors suddenly enveloped the trio. Haku capitalized on Naruto and Sasuke's momentary confusion by diving into the nearest mirror. Naruto and Sasuke quickly moved back to back out of instinct. As they look outwards at their icy prison, Naruto said, "Hey Sasuke. Let's try to blast our way out." Sasuke shot out a fireball at one mirror while Naruto tried to pound a different mirror with Gale Wind Palm. Unfortunately, Naruto's and Sasuke's attacks only scratched their targets. Then, as if to add insult to injury, both mirrors rapidly repaired themselves, leaving no trace of the boy's attempt to escape. Haku's voice echoed throughout the icy prison saying, "This is my ultimate attack. Neither of you has any hope of escape. Make your peace with life, for you will soon leave it." In his usual rambunctious manner, Naruto said, "Hey Sasuke. What happens when fire gets caught in a breeze?" For a second, Sasuke wanted to smack Naruto over the head. Seriously, how could Naruto even think of asking a question like that at a time like this? But then Sasuke caught on to what Naruto was suggesting and he started to grin. In a slightly less arrogant than normal manner, Sasuke said, 3 feet o'clock on 3, 1, 2, 3. As soon as Sasuke said 3, he launched the largest fireball that he could make. Naruto almost instantly followed with a great breakthrough. Both the Great Breakthrough and the Gale Wind Palm took relatively the same skill and chakra to perform. Where these two wind justices differed was in how they were used. Gale Wind Palm concentrated the blast for great penetrating power. Great Breakthrough worked by creating a slightly weaker, but much larger blast to literally blow the enemy away. Thanks to this fact and how fire and wind jutsus worked, Naruto's and Sasuke's attacks merged to create an enormous, blazing hot fireball. Haku was paralyzed in shock when he saw the roaring fireball approach him. Zabuza's apprentice tried desperately to think of a way to escape from the oncoming attack. No matter where Haku looked, he couldn't find a way to escape. Naruto and Sasuke's combined attack was big enough that no matter which mirror Haku jumped to, he would be hit by the attack. Knowing that escape was impossible, Haku closed his eyes and calmly waited for the attack to hit. Instantly after the blazing hot fireball collided with the frozen mirrors, a huge explosion occurred. Both Naruto and Sasuke were forced to cover their eyes from the flares and minuscule ice shards. As soon as they could, they uncovered their eyes and gazed at the destruction they caused. While the actual damage to the structure of the bridge was light, there was vast surface scarring and there were occasional whiffs of smoke coming up. Naruto blinked his eyes at the damage and dumbly said, "Whoa, I didn't think we'd do this much if we teamed up." Quote, Sasuke would have retorted that he did most of the damage, if he had been paying attention to Naruto. Currently the Avenger of Team 7 was staring at Haku's corpse. Even though Sasuke didn't like to admit, Haku had been stronger than him. That was something that angered and exhilarated Sasuke. By beating Haku, Sasuke had proved he was one step closer to beating Itachi. However, there was one thing about the battle that infuriated Sasuke. Why hadn't his Sharingan activated? According to the Uchiha family scrolls, His battle with Haku was an almost perfect situation for the Sharingan to emerge. Sasuke's face hardened and he turned to look at Naruto. Could it be that Naruto's presence in the battle had prevented the Sharingan's emergence? Sasuke's musing and Naruto's staring quickly ended when the two of them heard the sound of birds chirping coming from the mist where Zabuza and Kakashi were fighting. Next, they heard a meaty smack and saw a figure start to walk towards them in the mist. Both Naruto and Sasuke let out sighs of relief when they saw Kakashi emerge from the mist. Kakashi looked at the blast damage, then at Haku's body, and then at the boys. It didn't take a genius to figure out that the two had teamed up to defeat their opponent. There was no way that Sasuke had enough chakra to create a fireball big enough to do this kind of damage. And while Naruto might have enough chakra, Kakashi knew he blonde student didn't have the control or the knowledge to create a fireball capable of this kind of damage. So in his typical manner Kakashi said, "Good job you two. This is why teamwork is so important. Now why don't we go check up on Sakura and Tazuna?" Quote. Over at Gato's compound Jiraiya was sitting at Gato's desk reading the late scum's papers. At first Jiraiya had been planning on leaving Gato alone and just gathering more information on the crime lord. Sure, the Toad Sage didn't like what the man was doing, but taking out the crime lord would have created some tangles for Jiraiya's spy network. That had all changed when Jiraiya had discovered that Gato was into forced prostitution. Sure, Jiraiya liked to visit brothels, but forced prostitution was beyond the pale for him. After all, it was one thing when the women choose the profession and it was an entirely different thing to force a woman into that line of work. Jiraiya was the biggest pervert on the continent, however, he had a strict look but don't touch unless the woman agreed policy. In fact, Jiraiya was known to beat down any guy who groped a girl. That was why so many of the older kunoichi could stand to work with Jiraiya in spite of his peeping habit. None of Gato's men had been spared from Jiraiya's wrath during the one-man assault on the base. As Jiraiya went through Gato's ledger he could scarcely believe his luck. Gato had kept a clear record of every illegal business that he had been involved in. More than that, Gato kept a record of every public official that he had been bribing and even had them down by name. This surprised Jiraiya since crime lords usually used code phrases for their bribery accounts. Gato must have been one confident scumbag if he willing to write all of this down without trying to hide anything. Of course Jiraiya reasoned, this ledger was never meant to see the light of day and this was just for Gato's private viewing. While Jiraiya was collecting the various official papers needed to put over 100 compromised officials and practically every 2-bit gang in jail, a small toad hopped into the room. In all honesty Jiraiya couldn't remember who the toad was, but he could remember that the toad was one of Gamabuta's nephews. In a disinterested manner the Toad Sage said, "What you got to report?" Toad sent Jiraiya a piercing glare and then replied, "Just reporting about the bridge. All of the Konoha ninjas survived the battle relatively unharmed. The Jonin took out the missing ninja with the Zanbeitu, while the two boys took out the other ninja with a combo fireball attack. That's all, so can I leave now?" Jiraiya waved the toad away and said, Sure. While the toad disappeared, Jiraiya thought about the report on the bridge. From the sounds of things everything was turning out all right. Obviously, Naruto had been studying those scrolls that he had left the brat. Depending on how far Naruto came, the boy might get another gift like that the next time Jiraiya was in Konoha. Naruto sat on Tazuna's dock as the evening star first appeared and stared out across the water. For the first time in Naruto's young life he had taken a life and it was eating him up inside. It wasn't just an enemy that he had killed, but a real human being with hopes and dreams. Did he, Naruto wondered, have the right to take those hopes and dreams from someone? Was he really a monster like many of the villagers claimed? No, he couldn't be a monster. A monster wouldn't feel remorse over killing someone. Since he felt remorse over Haku's death, Naruto knew without a doubt that he wasn't a monster. But still, what was he and what right did he have to take someone else's life? Slowly Naruto started to remember everyone that he cared for. Old Man Hokage, Tsuki, Ayame, Iruka, Sakura, Kakashi, and even Sasuke. Then Naruto's mind transposed those happy memories onto what he had seen here in Wave Country. Tears started to fall as Naruto thought about his few precious people suffering like that. Naruto suddenly opened his eyes as he realized that he would do anything to prevent his friends from suffering like this. That was a reason to fight and kill someone else. Indeed, it was the only rational reason to fight. Naruto slowly pulled one of his kunai from its storage pocket and brought the blade towards his right palm. Ever so slowly, Naruto cut his palm. The cut was deep enough so that his blood flowed, but not so deep as to create permanent damage on a normal person. Naruto closed his bloody palm and let a few drops of blood drip onto the pier. Then in a solemn manner he vowed, "I will never use lethal force against an opponent unless it's to protect someone." For a few moments, Naruto just sat where he was and looked at his bloody fist. Then Naruto slowly opened his right hand and to his surprise a small scar was starting to form. Usually small cuts like that wouldn't leave a mark. It was the only real benefit that Naruto got from holding the Kyuubi. So why was this scar not being healed? Personally, Naruto didn't really care whether or not that cut scarred. If it didn't then oh well, but if it did scar then it would serve as a reminder of his oath. After that Naruto stood up and headed towards Tsunade's house. For a second Naruto thought about joining in the celebratory feast that the bridge builder was throwing, but then Naruto decided against it. There was a major reason why Naruto didn't want to join in the party, besides the fact that he never really felt comfortable around large crowds of people. That fight on the bridge had made Naruto realize that he still had a long way to go before he could match Old Man Hokage or even Kakashi. If Naruto was going to protect everyone that he cared about, he'd have to train a lot harder. That meant he needed to break out those books again and study them. Back at the Iruka had always said that the worst thing for a ninja was to be blind to one's own weaknesses. Naruto had always wondered, when he wasn't ditching school that is, what Iruka meant by that. Now that Naruto knew exactly what Iruka meant, he was determined to correct his faults. Even if it meant studying, Naruto would take it like a man and study those books. Sarutobi glared at Kakashi from across his desk and slowly said, "You mean to tell me, Hatake, that you agreed to lead a team of Green Genin on an A- class mission? Not only that, but you failed to call for reinforcements or establish a proper watch. And that's not even getting to the bottom of your incompetence. Introducing tree climbing exercises after a month of active duty. What have you been doing this past month with your team, watching porn?" The old leader then folded his hands and said in a neutral tone that sent shivers of fear down Kakashi's back, "What you did on that mission, Hatake, was inexcusable." Sarutobi pulled out a half-inch thick folder and placed it on his desk. In that same chilling and yet neutral tone, Sarutobi continued on. "Do you know what this is, Hatake? This is a detailed record of everything your team did since it encountered the Demon Brothers to the time your team left Wave. There are even word-for-word records of your team's conversations, particularly your orders and your training in this report." Kakashi somehow gave the impression that he was blushing, even though no one could see it because of his mask. Oh, Kakashi knew that he'd get into a little trouble considering how the mission had gone. However, he had never expected to be in this much trouble. The old, usually friendly, Hokage was really cooking Kakashi's goose over this mission. Sarutobi then sighed and said, "I see now that it was a mistake having you command a genin team. You are obviously incapable of handling the responsibilities that are required of a genin instructor." He then pulled out a small scroll and started writing on it while continuing on, "As of this moment, Jonin Kakashi Hatake, you are no longer the instructor for Genin Team 7. You are to tell your former students to report to my office in 1 hour so that they may meet their new instructor." Even though Kakashi didn't show it, he felt like someone had pounded a dull, rusty spike through his chest. He was removed from his team for negligence. That was a dishonor that would stay with him for the rest of his life. It was one thing to be reassigned because you were needed elsewhere or you couldn't work well with your teammates, but removal was something totally different. It meant that you screwed up so badly that you weren't ever going to get a second chance. With only a dumb nod, Kakashi left Sarutobi's office and dragged himself through the streets. How had it come to this? Slowly as Kakashi wandered towards Team 7's training ground he thought back over everything Team 7 had been through. Even if Kakashi didn't want to admit it, he'd been happier since he took control of Team 7 than he'd been in years. Sasuke, Naruto, and Sakura, all three of them had grown on Kakashi. They were like the nephews and niece that he never had. And now, it was gone. Kakashi realized all too late that he'd been so wrapped up in his past, that he hadn't paid attention to the presence. By mourning the past, he'd been destroying his future. If only he'd been training Team 7 instead of mourning his comrades' passing. What would Obito and Minato think of the fact that he had put their only living relatives in jeopardy because he failed to train them properly? Minato would have called in for reinforcements the second he knew that the situation had escalated beyond what the team could be expected to handle. As for Obito, he'd probably get on Kakashi's case about mourning everyone for so long. Eventually, Kakashi made it to where Team 7 was waiting for him. Sasuke was sitting on a tree branch staring out at the small stream nearby. Sakura was lying against the bridge post staring at Sasuke. Naruto was surprisingly sitting next to the tree trunk almost perpendicular to Sasuke and reading a scroll. After looking at this bittersweet scene for a moment with the Sharingan to engrave it into his memory, Kakashi slowly walked into his soon-to-be former student's view. Normally, Naruto would have dropped his scroll at this point and start pestering Kakashi about either learning something new or about getting a cool mission. The boy had matured a good deal since the mission to Wave, but that maturity only came out when Naruto was actually training or on a mission. Even during the missions, Naruto's newfound maturity only showed itself by the reduction of his complaints about said Missy. Ons. Naruto looked at Kakashi and inquired, "What's wrong, Kakashi?" Even though Naruto didn't mean to, the innocent question was like someone was twisting the knife that Kakashi felt was lodged in his heart. Kakashi forced himself to look at his former students and say, I've been relieved of command for Team 7. You three are to report to the Hokage's office immediately where you will meet your new commander and instructor. Listen to him or her and follow the directions you are given. Also, remember that those who don't follow the rules are trash, but those who abandon their comrades are lower than trash. It has been a pleasure teaching the three of you and I wish you well in your future careers. Quote. Back in Sarutobi's office, an Anbu appeared before the old Hokage kneeling. The Anbu bowed his head and said, "You called for me, Lord Hokage." Sarutobi nodded his head and firmly said, "Take off your mask, Tenzo. As of this moment you are on permanent stand down from the Anbu. As of this moment you are Team 7's Jonin instructor. You will carry out this task until all members of Team 7 have achieved the rank of Chunin. After that, you may return to the Anbu or be a regular Jonin." Tenzo nodded his head, removed his Anbu mask, and quickly pocketed it. He then stood up and said, "I will try to validate your trust in me, Lord Hokage. But I have to wonder, wasn't it a little drastic to remove Kakashi from his post? After all, no one was seriously harmed by the mission and there are times when missions escalate beyond what is expected." Quote. Sarutobi sighed and said, "While it is true that missions can get out of hand, what happened in Wave was inexcusable. Kakashi should have called for reinforcements as soon as he realized that Zabuza would return. Wave is close enough that the message could be sent and the reinforcements would arrive well before Zabuza recovered. Genin have no reason to be in the middle of an A- class mission, except in times of war. What's more, the lack of training that Kakashi gave his team beforehand shows that he hasn't been taking his responsibility as seriously as he should. I trust that you will not make the same mistakes, Tenzo." Quote. Before Tenzo could respond, the office door swung open and Team 7 barged into the room. Naruto was the first through the door and he practically screamed out, "Hey old man. What's the deal about Kakashi not being our teacher?" Naturally, Sasuke and Sakura were slightly embarrassed with how Naruto addressed Sarutobi. However, they both had similar sentiments. After a brief chuckle escaped Sarutobi's lips, he stated, "Kakashi has been removed as your instructor because of some serious mistakes in judgment that he made during your last mission. Try to remember what Kakashi did wrong, so that if any of you become Jonin instructors you will know what not to do. Tenzo here will be your new Jonin instructor. I expect that you three will show him the respect and obedience that he deserves." Quote. Tenzo slowly looked at his three new students memorizing their faces. After their faces were burned into his memory, Tenzo said, "As Lord Hokage said, I am Tenzo, your new instructor. Since you are unused to leader changes yet, I shall allow you to have this afternoon off. I urge you to take this time to review your current skills in independent training. Tomorrow you will report to Team 7's usual training ground at 7 a.m. with your full mission gear. That is all. Sasuke was the first member of Team 7 to respond to Tenzo's order by simply turning around and walking out the door. Sakura quickly followed after Sasuke, but not before politely saying goodbye to Tenzo. However, Naruto stood where he was questioningly looking at Tenzo. For a second, Tenzo wondered why Naruto was staring at him. Then it came to him and the former Anbu politely stated, "Do not worry Naruto. I bear you no ill will because of the Kyuubi." As soon as Naruto heard that, the young man's face regained its normal smile and Naruto left the office. Sarutobi smiled at the scene and said, "You may not realize it Tenzo, but you just earned yourself a special place in Naruto's heart. The boy may be impatient when it comes to subtle things, however, he's quite good once he's shown a little attention and how to do something. If I may offer you some advice, don't reveal that you have the ability to suppress the Kyuubi's chakra, even though the Shodai's technique is not as effective without the necklace. So far, Naruto hasn't shown the ability to draw on the Kyuubi's power and to tell him that it could get out of control. Would cause more harm than good." Tenzo nodded his head and said, "I understand and agree Lord Hokage." As 7 a.m. neared, the genin in Team 7 approached the training ground. To their surprise, Tenzo was already at the training ground waiting for them. It just served to remind the members of team that they weren't dealing with Kakashi anymore. Tenzo nodded approvingly when everyone was in front of him with 1 minute to spare. He then calmly said, "Remember to always arrive at or a little before you are supposed to arrive. Arriving too early or late can lead to major, possibly fatal, problems on a mission. Now then, I want you all to sit down in front of me." Once the genins were sitting down, Tenzo continued on. "There are 3 things that a ninja must know if he or she is to successfully complete a mission. First, you must be aware of your strengths and weaknesses. Without an honest understanding of your strengths and weaknesses, you will overestimate your abilities, which most likely will result in you being killed on a mission. Second, you must be aware of your teammates' strengths and weaknesses. Without this knowledge, you cannot know how your teammates can help with the mission. Finally, you must know how to work with your teammates. Without this knowledge, your team will not be as effective as it can be. Since some of you may still overestimate your skills, or underestimate your teammates' skills, we will first focus on becoming aware of our own abilities and deficiencies. Each of you will spar with me using the full extent of your abilities. Meanwhile, your teammates will watch the spars. After each spar you will give your assessment of your skills, then your teammates will give their assessments, and finally I will give my assessment. It will be your responsibility to learn from these assessments and see where you are mistaken in your judgment." Tenzo looked at the trio and calmly stated, "Since Sasuke was the rookie of the year, he will have to spar with me first. Remember Naruto and Sakura, you must pay attention to this spar and be honest with your assessments." Said students nodded their heads while Sasuke got up and headed a little ways away into the grassy meadow. Once Tenzo was sure that his other students understood their instructions, he approached Sasuke and the spar commenced. At first the match, which was almost strictly taijutsu, was even between Tenzo and Sasuke. In fact, Sakura actually thought that Sasuke was just as good in taijutsu as Tenzo. However, Naruto was far more critical about Sasuke's match and quickly caught on to what was happening. Tenzo restricted himself so that he was fighting on Sasuke's skill level. After a few minutes, Tenzo started to release some of his self-imposed restrictions. With those restrictions removed, the spar took on a whole new dimension. Naruto couldn't help being amazed at what he was seeing. Sakura couldn't help being shocked by what she was seeing. Sasuke couldn't help being furious at what was happening to him. Tenzo was slowly, relentlessly taking control of the fight. The team's instructor seemed to be in control of every aspect of the fight. In fact, it was like Tenzo knew where Sasuke would be and what move he would use. Very quickly Sasuke got fed up with Tenzo controlling the fight and launched a fire-style fireball. Tenzo calmly stood in front of the fireball and created an earth-style mud wall to block Sasuke's attack. On the sidelines, Naruto and Sakura breathlessly watched as their teammates traded low-level ninjutsu. After a few moments something strange started to happen. Sasuke kept on firing his jutsus every which way except for where Naruto, Sakura, and Tenzo were. Tenzo then signaled Naruto and Sakura to be quiet, which made them realize that Sasuke was under a genjutsu. Eventually Tenzo felt that Sasuke had embarrassed himself enough and calmly pinned Sasuke to the ground. He then led Sasuke over to where the other members of Team 7 were at, and had Sasuke sit down. Once Sasuke was sitting down, Tenzo said, "So Sasuke, what was your mistakes in the spar?" Sasuke moodily muttered, "Letting you get behind me." Quote. Naturally, Naruto jumped in, "Hey bastard, you forgot that you were trapped in a genjutsu. Also, there's the fact that Tenzo completely owned you in taijutsu." And following the laws of Team 7's thermodynamics, Sakura promptly bashed Naruto's skull. While Sakura was removing her fist from Naruto's head, she said, "Don't speak to Sasuke like that, Naruto." Although Naruto was partially right, Sasuke, you were caught in a genjutsu for a while. Tenzo nodded his head and calmly explained, "Overall you did fairly well for a genin, Sasuke. However, there are a few things you need to work on. First off, you started to underestimate my skill in taijutsu. Often, enemy ninjas will hold back some of their skill to lure the enemy into false confidence. Second, there were a few spots in your taijutsu where you were slow in your defense. It's obvious that you're counting on the Sharingan to tell you when to protect those areas. However, you don't have the Sharingan yet, and so you shouldn't use that taijutsu style. Finally, your ability to detect subtle genjutsu isn't that good. Once again, you are obviously expecting to use the Sharingan to detect those genjutsu, and you should stop that." Sasuke silently ground his teeth together because of Tenzo's assessment as Sakura started her spar. How could Tenzo even suggest that he not use the traditional Uchiha taijutsu style? Tenzo was practically saying to Sasuke that the Avenger wouldn't develop the Sharingan. The mere insinuation that Sasuke might not develop the Sharingan was tantamount to blasphemy for the young man. All of his forefathers to his great-great-grandfather Madara and beyond had wielded the Sharingan, so Sasuke knew that eventually he'd command the Sharingan as well. It was all a matter of time. Although Sasuke had missed Sakura's spar because of his brooding, he really didn't miss much. Even Naruto, as much as he hated to, had to admit that Sakura's spar was pathetic. Sure, she gave it her all, but there's only so much a person can do with poor physical conditioning, substandard taijutsu form, small chakra reserves, and a very limited arsenal of jutsus. Once Tenzo finished critiquing Sakura, it was Naruto's turn. As Naruto approached Tenzo, he thought about Sasuke's and Sakura's fights. One thing that was obvious to Naruto was the fact that Tenzo was tough. Possibly even tougher than Zabuza or Kakashi. How was he supposed to defeat someone like that by himself? Naruto didn't want to admit it, but Wave had showed Naruto that he wasn't as great as he had thought. This minuscule bit of maturity gave Naruto a flash of inspiration. How was he able to beat or at least weaken stronger ninjas in the past? Simple. He had been an unpredictable pain in the butt. Maybe some of those same tricks could work on Tenzo. After all, Sasuke went by the book and Tenzo soundly dominated that spar. Tenzo fixed his eyes on Naruto and wondered what was going through the blonde's head. After a moment, Tenzo was unable to get a good read on Naruto, but he decided to start the spar. Naturally, Naruto's opening move was to spam the field with shadow clones. Many of the clones charged for Tenzo and those were methodically destroyed. So many clones were destroyed that Tenzo disappeared from Sasuke's and Sakura's view in a cloud of smoke. The only way Sasuke and Sakura knew that Tenzo was still slaughtering the clones was the loud poof sound that each clone made as it was destroyed. Once Tenzo had taken care of the last shadow clone that had attempted to blitz him, the new instructor took a defensive stance. Since Tenzo had to do a few catch Naruto missions when he was younger, he knew better than to just charge out of the smoke trying to find the boy. Unlike Sasuke, Naruto would likely use this time to set traps to cause problems. Tenzo knew that when Naruto took things seriously, the boy could do some pretty impressive things. The only question Tenzo had at the moment was how seriously was Naruto taking this spar. As soon as the smoke cloud dissipated, Tenzo got his answer. Gale wind palms and several wind style. Great breakthroughs were shot at Tenzo from practically every angle imaginable. Tenzo calmly jumped high into air and discreetly created a set of wooden kunai. In a twisting manner, Tenzo let the kunai fly and each one struck its target. Amid the pops of the dissipated shadow clones, there was a single thud. With Naruto's location revealed, Tenzo homed in on the spot like a missile. Naruto's momentary surprise at being hit by a blunt wooden kunai was all the time that Tenzo needed. The student and the master commenced their one-on-one taijutsu spar with Naruto frantically avoiding Tenzo's strikes. Rolling, twisting, jumping, it didn't matter to Naruto what he did as long as he avoided Tenzo's fists. A couple of times Naruto tried to create some shadow clones, but Tenzo never let Naruto have enough time to finish the jutsu. After a few minutes, Tenzo had found out what he needed and forced Naruto into submission. He then led Naruto back to where Sasuke and Sakura were sitting. Once Naruto rejoined his teammates, Tenzo said, "No then, what do you have to say about Naruto's performance?" Sasuke simply stated, "Pathetic, as usual." Sakura was hesitant in responding for a second, but then she quickly agreed with Sasuke. Naturally, Naruto started to pout because Sakura thought he was pathetic. Tenzo sighed and replied, "You two weren't paying enough attention to the spar." Naruto's initial moves were fairly decent. His only real problem in that part was the fact that he didn't coordinate the attack with the shadow clones too well. On the other hand, Naruto's taijutsu was not as good as I had hoped it would be. The major problem that Naruto has in that area is the fact that he is unsuited for the tiger style that is taught at the Ninja Academy. One of the other former academy styles would be more suitable for Naruto. Quote, Sakura interrupted at this point and said, "But Tenzo, there's only one taijutsu style that's taught at the academy." "What do you mean by former academy styles?" Both Sasuke and Naruto focused on Tenzo as he said, 5 years ago the High Council overrode Lord Hokage and had a series of educati onal reforms put in place in the academy. Some of the things, like removing the option of early graduation, were needed. Sadly, the educational reforms also removed many things from the academy so that everything was much more unified. Among the subjects reformed were the taijutsu classes. Previously, there had been 5 styles taught at the academy: tiger style, panda style, turtle style, hummingbird style, and fox style. Ever since those reforms, the only style taught at the academy has been the tiger style. Of course, members of ninja clans are allowed to substitute their clan style for the tiger style taught at the academy. Tiger style is a poor taijutsu style for Naruto because it doesn't make use of his natural agility. Although the hummingbird style would make use of Naruto's agility, Naruto wouldn't do too well with the precision accuracy that style requires. The panda style and the turtle style are even more unsuited for Naruto than the first two because one is a grappling style and the other is a very defensive style. Therefore, Naruto should learn the fox style because it combines his direct attitude with his natural agility. When Tenzo first mentioned that there was a fox style, Naruto immediately became nervous. If things were going like Naruto was suspecting they were going, the resentful villagers were about to have another thing they would claim proved he was the Kyuubi. Sure, the fox style was a style that was apparently part of Konoha, but when did rational thought ever stop morons from acting? However, as Tenzo explained the other styles, Naruto began to lose some of his nervousness at the thought of possibly learning the fox style. Obviously, Tenzo was really trying to help Naruto out by picking a better taijutsu style. Sure, the name was probably going to give Naruto problems, but he wasn't about to complain. Naruto decided then and there that he'll follow Tenzo's instructions as best he could. It was only fair considering that Tenzo was trying hard to teach him. Sarutobi was sitting at his desk when his old teammates walked through the door. The old Hokage stopped working when he saw his old teammates and said, "Koharu, Homura, what can I do for you two today?" Koharu politely, stiffly said, "You could start off by explaining why Kakashi Hatake was removed from command of Team 7. This caused Sarutobi to narrow his eyes and he replied, "I don't see how that decision requires any explanation. Jiraiya's report clearly shows that Kakashi is not suited for commanding a genin squad. This, plus the fact that Team 7's growth as a team was stunted by Kakashi's half-hearted attempts at training, left me with no choice except for removing Kakashi from the team." Quote, Homura gave his old friend a polite nod and then rebutted, while Kakashi's behavior during Team 7's recent mission leaves much to be desired. Both Kaharu and I have to question whether it was a wise maneuver to fully remove Kakashi from Team 7. After all, he is the only one in the village who can train certain vital skills to the members of Team 7. Sarutobi shook his head and stated, I will not restore Kakashi to Team 7 simply because of his transplanted Sharingan eye. The Sharingan is a tool, no more, no less. Besides, we don't even know for sure if Sasuke will activate the Sharingan. Not every Uchiha was able to activate the Sharingan, so it isn't a done deal that Sasuke will develop the Sharingan as well. Even if Sasuke activates the Sharingan, he has his clan scrolls to train with. Should Sasuke prove unable to use his clan scrolls, then Kakashi can give him a few pointers. Both of Sarutobi's teammates had to admit that the old monkey had backed them into a corner. They had been sure that they could convince Sarutobi to at least reassign Kakashi to Team 7 as an assistant instructor. After all, it was imperative that Konoha regain the Sharingan as a viable bloodline quickly. Since Kakashi was the only person in the village with a Sharingan eye, he obviously was the only person who could teach Sasuke about the Sharingan. However, Sarutobi's words now had the two elders worried about more than just getting Kakashi back on Team 7. What if Sarutobi was correct? What if Sasuke didn't develop the Sharingan? The two elders suddenly became very nervous as they remembered that the chance of activating the Sharingan drastically reduced for each generation that didn't activate it. What if the Sharingan became lost? Sarutobi saw his teammates' discomfort and could barely keep himself from smiling. It might be juvenile of him, but Sarutobi couldn't help himself from enjoying their discomfort. While Sarutobi was amicable enough with his former teammates, there was an undercurrent of friction between him and them. For Sarutobi, the friction was because Homura and Kaharu had ordered Itachi to kill all the members of the Uchiha clan. In his mind, there was absolutely no reason to order Itachi to kill every man, woman, and child in the Uchiha clan. Killing the ringleaders and main supporters of the coup would have been enough. After letting the duo stew for a minute, Sarutobi said, while I appreciate this visit, I'm afraid that our little chat will have to come to an end. As you know, the paperwork breeds faster than rabbits if I don't attend to it. Please come whenever you like if you discover something that needs to be brought to my attention. Kaharu and Homura caught on to Sarutobi's dismissal and both of them quietly left. Omake. As Naruto approached Tenzo, he thought about Sasuke's and Sakura's fights. One thing that was obvious to Naruto was the fact that Tenzo was tough. Possibly even tougher than Zabuza or Kakashi. How was he supposed to defeat someone like that by himself? Naruto didn't want to admit it, but Wave had showed Naruto that he wasn't as great as he had thought. This minuscule bit of maturity gave Naruto a flash of inspiration. How was he able to beat or at least weaken stronger ninjas in the past? Simple. He had been an unpredictable pain in the butt. Maybe some of those same tricks could work on Tenzo. After all, Sasuke went by the book and Tenzo soundly dominated that spar. Tenzo fixed his eyes on Naruto and wondered what was going through the blonde's head. After a moment, Tenzo was unable to get a good read on Naruto, but he decided to start the spar. To Tenzo's surprise, Naruto jumped backwards and shouted out, Shadow Clone Jutsu. Before Tenzo could attack the clones, all of the clones shouted out, Lesbian Orgy Jutsu. It was just too much for Tenzo. All around him were dozens of different women in various intimate poses. The hospital quickly certified that he died of massive nasal hemorrhaging. After news about that got around, all of the men in Konoha treaded very carefully around Naruto. Naruto was sitting on top of the Yondaime's head trying to meditate and wasn't having much success. The meditation was part of the new training regime that Tenzo had installed after assessing the team. Every other day when the team wasn't on mission, Naruto was supposed to spend 2 hours meditating. According to Tenzo, the meditation would help Naruto control his chakra and help make Naruto more aware of his surroundings. Naruto chose to meditate on the Yondaime's head because Tenzo told him to find a peaceful spot when meditating, and the top of the Hokage monument was a very peaceful spot. As Naruto unsuccessfully attempted to stay still, his mind wandered over the past week. Things under Tenzo were very different than they had been under Kakashi. For one thing, Tenzo had told Team 7 up front that they weren't going to get another mission like Wave at all. Sure, there were C-rank missions in their futures, but they should expect them to be simple escort missions like the Wave mission was supposed to be. Sakura had been secretly grateful about Tenzu's announcement. However, Sasuke and Naruto had been quite upset at that news. Once Tenzo had set Naruto and Sasuke straight, the blonde could see why Tenzo had come down on that point. As vexing as it was to Naruto, he wasn't fully ready for missions higher than the average C-rank mission. That had been an extremely tough pill for Naruto to swallow, but the possibility of Sakura getting hurt or killed because of going on a higher ranked mission before the team was ready forced Naruto to accept the fact. Sasuke was another story altogether. Unlike Sakura, who was worried about overstepping her limits, or Naruto, who was worried about Sakura's safety, Sasuke hadn't been able to accept the fact that Team 7 wouldn't be getting into any major fights soon. The last Uchiha was determined to awaken his Sharingan, and he knew that only a life or death struggle would do that. Naruto had noticed that Sasuke had slowly been getting more and more aggressive during training. However, Naruto simply assumed that Sasuke was feeling threatened by his progress and only redoubled his efforts to outdo the last Uchiha. In Naruto's opinion, Tenzo was a great teacher. Much to Naruto's annoyance, Tenzo wasn't teaching them super cool and powerful jutsus. However, Tenzo was teaching Team 7 useful D-rank jutsus and showing them how to use the lower class jutsus to wear an enemy out. Naruto's favorite memory when Tenzo was teaching the team about this was when Tenzo completely wore out Sasuke while only using the 3 Academy jutsus and the Earth R. Elise Headhunter jutsu. It was one thing to see Tenzo beat Sasuke during that spar on the first day. But seeing Sasuke utterly humiliated like that, now that was priceless. However, Sasuke's defeat had also served to drive home to Naruto that he still had a long way to go. True, Naruto had accepted the fact when he realized that Sakura could get hurt on a higher level mission. But it was seeing just how powerful and skillful other ninjas out there were that really forced Naruto to admit that he wasn't as great a ninja as he wanted to be. Of course, that only meant that Naruto was even more determined than ever to get better. 2 weeks after Tenzo took over Team 7, the team was walking towards the Hokage castle when Naruto said, "Hey Tenzo. Don't ya think that we're ready for a C-rank mission?" Seeing the glare Sakura was sending him, Naruto quickly amended, "It doesn't have to be a big mission. Even a delivery outside the village would work." Sasuke quietly simmered while Sakura was happy that she had gotten Naruto to cool down on potential missions. With a faint smile on his face, Tenzo said, "Be patient, Naruto. Instead of asking for a C-rank mission, you should have asked, is the team ready for one? Never go into a situation without understanding as many variables as you can. Trust me, it will make things a lot easier for you in life. With all the difficulties in life, we don't need to give ourselves handicaps." Quote. Sakura looked over to Tenzo and asked, "Does that mean that we're getting a D-rank mission today?" Tenzo calmly said, "It might and it might not. I only told Naruto that he was asking the wrong question. Never assume anything, Sakura. As a ninja, you all must carefully examine everything, even words, that you encounter on your missions. This is especially true whenever you are dealing with a political leader. Sometimes you might have a mission where you are part of a diplomatic team. In that case, you have to especially pay close attention to what everyone says because words can be extremely slippery." Naruto quickly asked, "So, does that mean that we will or we won't be getting a C-rank mission, Tenzo?" Quote. Very quickly Tenzo replied, "What it means, Naruto, is very simple. Just wait and see. Remember, one of the biggest things that you need to work on is being patient. You'll find out what type of mission we'll be getting very soon. Until then, just be quiet and pay attention to your surroundings." With that said, Team 7 quietly entered the Hokage castle and headed to the mission assignment room. When Team 7 got to the room, Sarutobi looked over at Tenzo and said, "Tell me, Tenzo. What mission level would you prefer for your team to take today? We have got a lot of customers today, so there are some decent pickings." The Genin trio immediately turned to look at Tenzo and hear his answer. After a moment of deliberation, Tenzo said, "Team 7 is ready for a simple C-rank mission, Lord Hokage." Sarutobi nodded his head and said, I have just such a mission. A professor at the Fire University is taking a few of his students on a dig at one of the abandoned cities. He has requested a ninja escort and guard for 6 weeks while he and his students have their dig. It's a long mission of AC rank, but everything checks out. Do you want this mission? Naruto really wanted to scream at Tenzo to take the mission. So what if it was guard duty while a bunch of geeks dug up rocks? It was a lot better than picking up garbage or chasing after Tora. However, Naruto was able to keep his mouth shut. Tenzo had been stressing patience and Naruto was sure that Tenzo would nix the mission if he spoke now. There was no way that Naruto was going to blow it and get stuck with a D-rank mission if he could avoid it. Actually, it was Naruto's semi-surprising maturity that made up Tenzo's mind. Tenzo gave Naruto one last glance and then he said, Team 7 accepts the mission, Lord Hokage. When are we to leave? While making the necessary notation, Sarutobi replied, Professor Sanada is planning on leaving for the dig in 2 days. Team 7 will be taken off the mission roster until then so that you can make the necessary preparations for the mission. Sarutobi then handed Tenzo a copy of the mission request and politely dismissed the team. Naruto reported to the inn where Professor Sanada and the rest of the professor's team were staying at about a half hour before the mission was supposed to start. Professor Sanada's expedition consisted of the professor, his daughter Mitsuki, her fiancé Kazuki, and 2 of Kazuki's classmates Toji and Kaworu. Naruto decided to start up a conversation with the guys while the professor and Mitsuki were going over some last-minute checks. So Kazuki, what's this dig about? Kazuki looked down at his quartz-sized guard and replied, Well Naruto, Professor Sanada teaches techno-archaeology at the Fire University. This expedition is to see what we can find a pre-Six Realms Sage-era town that was recently discovered. Seeing the look of confusion on Naruto's face, Kazuki explained, About 400 years ago the world was very different. Advanced technology that could do things that seem unbelievable to us existed all throughout the world. Then there came the Great Cataclysm and the era of the Six Realms Sage. Techno-archaeologists like Professor Sanada go to the ruins of these ancient cities and try to recover technology. That's how many of the modern conveniences come about. Quote, this caught Naruto's interest and he asked, So what are you hoping to find, Kazuki? What are you looking for? The college student smiled and said, We don't have anything in peculiar that we're looking for. In this field you have to take what you can find. Personally, I'm hoping to find a car in good preservation. A car is sort of like a cart that doesn't need any animals or people to pull it. We've found plenty of records about cars, but no one's ever found one in good enough condition to reconstruct. A working replica. Mitsuki interrupted Kazuki and Naruto's conversation at this moment by saying, Kazuki dear, would you please help me over here? It seems that father thought it was okay to just pack ramen for the expedition. Naruto quietly let Kazuki leave the table and go help his fiancé. Ramen was Naruto's favorite food, but even he knew you shouldn't have it every day. Despite the rumors at school, Naruto only had ramen 2 or 3 times a week. True, he'd wolf down several bowls each time, but that was neither here nor there. Naruto tried to strike up a conversation with Toji and Kaworu, but he didn't get very far on that score. Toji was a jock who was at the academy because it was needed in order to become an officer in the army. The only reason why Toji was on this dig was to help pull up his grade in Professor Sanada's class. Kaworu on the other hand was simply hard to talk to. Apparently the white-haired boy was even more sociality clueless than Naruto and liked to refer to music that hadn't been widely played for hundreds of years. The rest of Team 7 walked in just as Mitsuki and Kazuki were wrapping up their argument with the professor. Naruto looked at his teammate and said, You might want to sit down. It seems crazy Professor only bought ramen for the expedition's food supplies. His daughter and future son-in-law are really laying into him and will probably be going out to get some more supplies soon. I think we've got an hour or so before they'll be ready to leave. Surprisingly, Sakura stated, It's amazing that you're being so calm about this, Naruto. I have expected you to be jumping to Professor Sanada's defense given how much you like ramen. Now that comment really hurt Naruto. He thought that Sakura was more observant than that. After all, Sakura's intelligence was one of the things that Naruto found so attractive about her. Naruto's face quickly switched to his pouting mode and he replied, "Sheesh Sakura. I thought you would have realized that I only pack 2 or 3 instant containers of ramen for long missions." Tenzo couldn't help feeling a little ashamed at Sakura's actions. She should have known that about Naruto by now. It wasn't even some big secret. Sakura would have known that if she paid a little bit of attention to Naruto during mealtimes. It looked like he would have to put her through some more awareness training. Sasuke stood in the background with his typical moody game face on. He wasn't too thrilled to be on this mission since the chance of facing opponents like Zabuza were extremely low. What made the mission even harder for Sasuke to stand was the fact that the professor was apparently an idiot. This was going to be a long, dull mission. The town that Professor Tsunade's expedition was after couldn't have been in a more desolate region of Fire Country. 20 miles northeast of the Wind Country border, Team 7 had to deal with the full front of the infamous Wind Wastelands. Supposedly, the arid conditions and the rocky walls around the ghost town would preserve some of the more sensitive artifacts the expedition was looking for. After the first few days of guard duty, Naruto was bored out of his mind. Staring out at endless sand is extremely dull. Naruto couldn't do any extensive ninjutsu or taijutsu training during the time he wasn't on watch because Tenzo didn't want any member of the team worn out if someone were to attack. Sure, the chance of someone attacking the expedition was almost zero, but those were Tenzu's orders. Unlike Sakura, Naruto hadn't brought anything to relax with. All Naruto had were the scrolls that he had been given in Wave. Those scrolls were extremely interesting, but after a while they became monotonous and Naruto simply created a bunch of shadow clones to practice the basic fuinjutsu that were listed in the scroll and some basic chakra control exercises. Sakura and Sasuke would try to spend the least amount of time that they could with Naruto when they were off duty. Sure, they were good associates, possibly even friends, but they didn't want to spend all their time with Naruto. Occasionally Naruto would talk with Tenzo about one thing or another. However, that still left a good deal of time where Naruto had to keep himself busy. This left Naruto with only one way to keep himself busy: meditation. For hours on end Naruto would sit on the same rock and simply meditate. One of Naruto's teammates would pull Naruto out of his meditation if it was time to eat or it was his shift. Other than that, the other members of Team 7 would let Naruto meditate. After all, they didn't want one of the other members of the team disturbing them while they were relaxing. Well, Sakura wouldn't mind if it was Sasuke who bothered her, but that wasn't about to happen. Something unique happened to Naruto 3 days before it was time to leave the dig. Naruto had been sitting on his rock like he usually did. However, the next second later Naruto found himself sitting in a pool of water. Opening his eyes, Naruto blurted out, "Hey, what gives? This isn't my rock." Instead of sitting on the rock facing the desert, Naruto was sitting in waist-deep water in a sewer. Quickly standing up, Naruto muttered to himself, "All right, where am I? There's no way I could just fall into a sewer without hearing the ground collapse beneath me. Besides, there's no hole in the roof. So then, what does that leave?" Naruto's eyes widened as he remembered Tenzo mentioning something about a mindscape when he explained meditation. Letting out a loud groan, Naruto said, "Great, just great. I've got a sewer for a mindscape. Why couldn't it be Gramps' office or Ichiraku Ramen?" After a few moments of ranting, Naruto calmed down and tried to think about his situation. Tenzo had said that a person's mindscape was affected by things in their lives. Naruto's eyes widened when he remembered about the Kyuubi. If he was here in his mind, then wouldn't the demon seal be around here somewhere as well? For a second, Naruto seriously considered trying to leave his mindscape. However, there was a feeling in Naruto's gut telling him that he needed to look around this place. In the end, Naruto decided to follow his gut. Naruto walked through a labyrinthine maze of sewage corridors and pipes until he finally reached the imposing iron gates of the Kyuubi's prison. Even with the dim lighting, Naruto could see the sleeping form of the Kyuubi. Its body radiated power even when it was asleep. Naruto just stood in front of the cage looking at the fox and trying to figure out what to do. The decision was taken out of Naruto's hands when the Kyuubi opened its blood-red eyes and growled out, "Why do you disturb my slumber, foolish mortal?" Naruto quickly shot back, I was meditating and I ended up in this dump. And don't get all high and mighty with me, you're as mortal as I am. Baring its teeth, the Kyuubi sent a blast of its hot breath at Naruto. The breath wasn't burning, but it definitely was hot. Naruto stayed right where he was even though he had to shield his eyes with his arm. After a few seconds, the Kyuubi stopped trying to blow Naruto away and started to chuckle. Well, it seems that the little ape child has some substance to him. But don't think that impresses me, brat. I've eaten dozens of rabbits with more substance than you. Why did you enter my domain? Naturally, Naruto took offense at being compared to a rabbit and said, listen fuzzball, I don't care what you think of me. However, I'd play nice if I were you. After all, you're just a squatter here and I'm the landlord. The Kyuubi quickly responded by saying, do you really think I care about what you think, mortal? You are nothing. Your village is nothing. In fact, your entire race is nothing compared to me. This prison will not hold me forever. Nothing can hold me forever, not even the gods can hold me. When I get out, you will be the first mortal that I kill. Instead of running, Naruto just stood there with his arms folded and he replied, get real fuzzball. If you could have escaped you would have long ago. There's no way you'd tolerate so many people back in Konoha thinking that I'm you. I bet that really gets to you, people thinking that big, bad Kyuubi is just a prankster who graduated last in his class. You're probably just as angry about it as I am. For a second, Naruto thought that the Kyuubi would roar out in rage at what he had said. However, all the Kyuubi did was let out a low, continuous growl. Then the Kyuubi demanded, what do you want, brat? Even an insignificant mortal like you has to do other things than feast your eyes on me. Naruto looked the Kyuubi in the eye, folded his arms around his chest, and then proclaimed, let's get one thing straight fuzzball. I hate you being in my gut just as much as you hate being here. However, you and I are stuck with each other until we both kick the bucket. Is there an agreement that we can make so that our situation is less intolerable for the both of us? The Kyuubi stared straight at Naruto as if he was judging his container. After Naruto didn't turn away, the Kyuubi grudgingly admitted, an accord can be reached. However, such things are not to be taken lightly. Our lives may be bound, but I would rather die than see you make a mockery of my name. Prove that you are worthy, brat, and I will deal with you. While that was better than Naruto expected, he was still quite annoyed with how the Kyuubi was talking to him. Naruto wanted to tell the Kyuubi where to put it right then and there. However, Naruto held his tongue and tried to figure out what he should say. Old man always told Naruto that he had to deal with annoying people as Hokage. What was the difference between dealing with a snobbish noble and dealing with an imprisoned demon? Naruto inquired, how do I prove that I am worthy of making a deal with you? Moreover, how do I know you won't backstab me? You're a trickster after all. Almost instantly the Kyuubi replied, I require two things of you, mortal. First, you shall not attempt to draw on my chakra until we reach an agreement. It is mine and I will not deal with a thief. Second, do not come to my prison again until you have become a true sage. If you do these two things, then you will have proved your worth to me. As proof of my sincerity, I'll allow the seal to draw twice the amount of energy from me to heal your body. Understand this, mortal, you have only one chance. Fail this test and I will never allow you to try again. Moreover, I'll do everything in my power to ensure that you die. Naruto wasn't completely sure if the Kyuubi really would try to get him killed. However, Naruto knew that he had to accept the Kyuubi's terms. The Kyuubi, even though Naruto didn't want to admit it, could be a great benefit to him in battle. Sure, it was a literal deal with the devil, but Naruto wouldn't mind making the deal if it helped him protect innocence. With a confident grin on his face, Naruto looked up and stated, you've got yourself a deal, fuzzball. Get ready to go to the bargaining table because I won't fail your test. Tenzo was walking near Naruto and suddenly stopped in his tracks. Thanks to Hashirama's infused DNA, Tenzo was extremely sensitive to demonic chakra and instantly detected the rising levels of demonic chakra emanating from Naruto. Instantly Tenzo prepared to use Mokoden in order to control Naruto. However, the rising demonic chakra abruptly stopped. The demonic chakra was only double the typical background level of demonic chakra that Naruto produced. What did this mean? Tenzo honestly couldn't make heads or tails of it. The amount of background demonic chakra Naruto produced wouldn't just spontaneously change. Someone, or something, had to be behind this. The fact that the background demonic chakra was exactly twice as large as it was a few moments ago only confirmed Tenzu's suspicions. Not even Tsunade would bet that this was all coincidence. Tenzu's eyes narrowed and he tried to decide what he should do. Eventually, he decided to wait and see what Naruto had to say. Naruto opened his eyes a few seconds after Tenzo made his decision. The blonde ninja looked at his teacher and asked, "Is everything okay, Tenzo?" Tenzo nodded his head and replied, "Something is bothering me, Naruto. The amount of demonic chakra you radiate just doubled a few minutes ago. What did you do to cause this?" With hand in the cookie jar look, Naruto answered, "It's an interesting story. You see, I was meditating since everything else is so boring when I accidentally went into my mindscape. While I was there, I met the Kyuubi in his cell. After a few minutes of egging each other on, he made an offer. He would be willing to make a deal with me if I become a true sage and don't take any of his chakra until we make the deal. Since I didn't want to be left high and dry, I got him to put up doubling my healing abilities so that I know that he'll hold up his end of the bargain. Now all I need to do is become a true sage and I can get the Kyuubi to make a deal with me." Quote. This wasn't the sort of situation that Tenzo was expecting. Part of Tenzo wanted to scold Naruto for being willing to trust the Kyuubi. However, another part of Tenzo couldn't help agreeing with Naruto. It seemed that the Kyuubi was holding its end of the bargain. Finally, Tenzo made up his mind and said, "Do you even know what a true sage is, Naruto?" Naruto looked down at his feet and said, "Ah, not exactly, Tenzo. Alright, I don't have a clue what a sage is. I figured that you knew, Tenzo. You do know what a sage is, right?" Tenzo sighed and replied, "Yes, I know what a sage, and a true sage for that matter, is. However, I'm not going to tell you just yet, Naruto. One of the key things a ninja needs is the ability to gather as much information as he can and make a rational decision. You're getting better at this, Naruto, but this situation shows that you've still got a long way to go. Don't bother to try and find out what a true sage is since that knowledge is restricted to Jonin level." Naruto's shoulders dropped and he said, "So I have to a Jonin before I can make the Kyuubi pay up." Quote. After thinking it over for a second, Tenzo said, "Possibly, possibly not. It may be possible to get you clearance to know what a true sage is since being a true sage is one of the Kyuubi's conditions before the demon will make a deal with you. However, just knowing what a true sage is won't be enough, Naruto. A person can't just become a sage like a person can choose to become a ninja. Otherwise, we'd just have sages as ninjas would be obsolete. Don't worry about it for now, Naruto. Just concentrate on getting stronger on your own abilities." There was a moment of silence as Naruto thought about what Tenzo had told him. Then Naruto gave his typical grin and said, "Just wait and see, Tenzo. I'll become the best ninja ever and it won't be because of fuzzball." Sarutobi held a meeting about 2 weeks after Team 7 got back from the dig for all the team leaders of Genin teams. The old Hokage looked around at his subordinates' faces and he said, "Well then, everyone. As you all know, the Chunin exams will be held here in Konoha this time. Konoha must make a strong showing in this exam since we are hosting it. This is especially true because of the Team Udatane incident last time in Kursa. If a similar incident happens again, then we will lose potential customers." Team Udatane left a bad taste in Mei Jonin's mouths and was a very sore subject among the members of Konoha's High Council. Ieyasu Udatane, Koharu Udatane's only son, had entered his Genin team into the Chunin exams last Me. All 3 of Ieyasu's students had been from prominent clans in the High Council. Sadly, all 3 students had been killed in the finals. What made the team members' deaths even worse for Konoha was the fact that all 3 died within 5 minutes of their matches starting and they were the ONL. Why deaths in the final round for that exam? Needless to say, that debacle had caused a hit in many people's confidence about Konoha ninjas. To everyone's surprise, Kurenai stepped forward and said, "I nominate my 3 Genin students to take the Chunin exams." Each of them has shown sufficient growth and maturity while under my command. They have earned the right to enter the exam. Asuma then added fuel to the bonfire by saying, I also nominate my genin students for the exam. They also have earned a shot at the exams. Not too sure if they will be promoted, but I figure it will be a good experience for them. Despite proper decorum, most of the people in Sarutobi's office started mumbling to each other and questioning the duo's judgment. A few were even trying to say that Team 8 and Team 10 couldn't compete in the exam. Finally Sarutobi had enough and he ordered, quiet down everyone. There is no law against a rookie team entering the Chunin exams. It doesn't happen often, but there is nothing against it as long as the team's Jonin instructor nominates the team. Team 8 and Team 10 will be allowed to enter the exams just like any other team. Sarutobi let the crowd quiet down before he continued on. Since this is such a heated topic, let's just get this out of the way. Tenzo, you lead the only other rookie team. Do you, or do you not, nominate Team 7 for the Chunin exams? All eyes turned on Tenzo and he began to feel uncomfortable. After being in the Anbu for so many years, Tenzo preferred to not be the center of attention. It took Tenzo a few seconds to recover from the shock of being put on the spot and remember his answer to his answer. Tenzo turned to Sarutobi, bowed his head, and opened his mouth to give his answer. Omake. For a second, Naruto thought that the Kyuubi would roar out in rage at what he had said. However, all the Kyuubi did was let out a low, continuous growl. Then the Kyuubi demanded, what do you want, brat? Even an insignificant mortal like you has to do other things than feast your eyes on me. Naruto just smirked and said, actually I am going to feast on you Kyuubi. I just can't decide if I want to roast you or boil you. The Kyuubi blinked his eyes and exclaimed, say what? Faster than the Kyuubi could blink, Naruto pulled out a large grinding stone and started sharpening a gigantic cooking knife. As Naruto was sharpening his knife he said, I'm hungry and you're already in my stomach. Since you cause me nothing but trouble, I might as well get some culinary enjoyment out of you. I can't wait to try this new ramen recipe I heard about from Ayame. One of the main ingredients is fox animals. When the Kyuubi heard that he covered his family jewels with his front paws and started whimpering. Naruto exited Konoha's ninja library carrying 2 thick books on Fuinjutsu. The art of Fuinjutsu had really started to interest Naruto and it was only partially because of the fact that he was a Jinchuriki. It was a very versatile art that many people were unfamiliar with, meaning that he'd have an advantage using it against future opponents. The fact that Fuinjutsu scrolls weren't nearly as regulated and restricted as ninjutsu or genjutsu scrolls at the library also helped to pique Naruto's interest. Just as Naruto was about to turn a corner, he saw Konohamaru, Miyogi, and Udon running down the street. Naruto quickly spotted the fear on the trio's faces and called out, what's going on Konohamaru? The little boy ran past Naruto screaming, can't talk now boss. Got an angry banshee from hell chasing me. Quote. Blinking his eyes, Naruto muttered in disbelief, an angry banshee from hell. What on earth is he talking about? Naruto quickly got his answer in the form of an enraged Sakura chasing after the Munchkin trio. He slapped himself in the face for forgetting about Sakura's temper and then chased after his teammate muttering, you so owe me Konohamaru. Getting Sakura mad at you is a dumb thing. For a few minutes Konoha was treated to a mini chase scene involving Sakura chasing after the Munchkin trio and ursing them about insults to her figure, while Naruto chased after Sakura trying to help the trio without becoming Sakura's punching bag. This chase ended when Konohamaru bumped into Kankuro and was promptly lifted up into the air by the angry Suna ninja. Temari was at Kankuro's side hissing into his ear, what do you think you're doing brother? Kankuro growled out, hey. This punk ran into me and I'm just teaching him a lesson. Naruto immediately cut in blurting out, leave Konohamaru alone. Are you so stupid that you want to start a war by beating up the Hokage's grandson? Temari didn't want to waste time with any of Kankuro's usual stupidity and clamped down on his shoulder blade. The pain from Temari's grip caused Kankuro to drop Konohamaru. As soon as Konohamaru's butt hit the street he took off and hid behind Naruto. Temari then looked at Konohamaru and politely said, sorry about my brother's actions. He got into the poisons a little too much when he was little and can't think things through that well. Quote, naturally, Kankuro exclaimed, what the hell are you talking about, Tamari? I know what I'm doing. Very quickly, Tamari hissed into his ear, if you did, brother, then you wouldn't be creating an international incident. Besides, you know that he could be near and we don't want to aggravate him. Kanokiro automatically started scanning for Gaara and to his relief didn't find a trace of his brother. By this point, Sakura had regained her wits and inquired, what are you two doing here in Konoha? Suna and Konoha may be allies, but that doesn't mean that you two can just show up in the village. You have to have a good reason for being in Konoha. Surprisingly, Naruto answered Sakura's question. They're probably here for the Chunin exams, Sakura. I was just at the library and saw in one of the reference books that Konoha's hosting the Chunin exams in 6 days. Naruto then turned to the older Sand siblings and said, I doubt that we'll see you two in the exam because our instructor hasn't brought up the exam with us. Good luck though. With that said, Naruto headed towards his apartment and motioned for the trio to follow him. Once Naruto and the trio were out of eyesight, Naruto bonked Konohamaru on the head and said, what were you thinking, Konohamaru, when you decided to insult Sakura's looks? One thing you should never ever do is insult how a girl looks. Not even insulting Sasuke will get Sakura that mad. You're actually lucky you ran into that Suna ninja, since him harming you would have caused an international incident. If Sakura had caught you, you would be black and blue. Konohamaru looked down at the street and mumbled, she just really made me mad. Naruto caught what Konohamaru said and asked, what did Sakura say to get you so mad that you'd insult her looks, Konohamaru? Don't worry, I won't tell your uncle or your grandfather. This friendly reassurance was all Konohamaru needed to open up and tell Naruto everything. Well, Udon, Miyogi, and I were practicing sneaking around when we overheard that Sakura girl complaining to a blonde-haired girl about you asking her tea. Oh, go out, and how thankful she was that you weren't asking as often as you used to. I then jumped in and told her how you could do better than a flat-chest, big-headed gorilla like her. Sakura's reported comment really cut Naruto. He had been hoping to get Sakura to go out by toning down his requests. Almost instantly Naruto said, Konohamaru, don't jump into a conversation like that again. I can handle anything anyone says about me, but I won't always be there to pull your fat out of the fire if you shoot your mouth off, Agai. This earned Naruto a quick hug from Konohamaru before the Munchkins left to go cause trouble somewhere else. As soon as Konohamaru core was out of sight, Naruto whirled around and punched the brick wall behind him. There was a small trickle of tears from Naruto's eyes as he whispered out, why? Why won't Sakura give me a chance? I treat her with more respect and kindness in one day than Sasuke does in a year. He doesn't care about her and always puts her down. Quote, one of the side effects of Naruto's meditation sessions was an increased awareness to his surroundings. Normally, this was a good thing as it allowed Naruto to make better decisions during practice and not get caught off guard. However, it also had the side effect of making it harder for Naruto to lie to himself. Sakura had her good points, but she didn't direct them towards Naruto. As far as she was concerned, the less time she spent around Naruto the better. Naruto wiped a tear away and muttered, no more. If Sakura wants someone who will belittle her rather than support her, then fine by me. I'm not going to waste my time chasing after anymore. Maybe one day she'll see what a mistake she's made. Quote, Team 7 met the next day at their customary training field. About 5 minutes later Tenzo arrived holding several pieces of paper in his hand. Tenzo looked at his students and said, these are applications to the Chunin exams. If you want to go, show up at room 302 in the academy on Friday. For the rest of the week we will not have team trainings so that you can think about whether or not you want to participate in the exams. If you want help training, then come see me and I will help you. Quote, Sasuke and Sakura quickly took their forms and left the field. However, Naruto didn't grab the offered form. Instead, he looked at Tenzo and said, something about this doesn't make sense. Why are you offering us this chance? Sasuke doesn't really work well with Sakura or me and he views us as dead weight. Sakura is still the weak point on the team. As for me, well, I'm still quite rough at the fox-style taijutsu and I've still got a few points to iron out with my ninjutsu. Quote, Tenzo put his hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, Very good, Naruto. You've realized that Team 7 isn't really ready for the Chunin exams. The team meets all of the requirements, but the skill just isn't quite there yet. I nominated you and the others as a test to see if you have matured enough to honestly rate your skills. If the three of you had decided to go forward, I would have let you so that you experience your mistake within the relative safety of Konoha. At least here you would have had easy access to friendly medical facilities. Naruto nodded his head while trying to deal with a torrent of emotions. On the one hand, Naruto was proud that he had figured out Tenzu's test when Sasuke hadn't even realized that the test was going on. However, Naruto was also disappointed that he wasn't really ready to take the Chunin exams. After a few minutes, he got some control over his emotions and looked up to Tenzo. With a pleading stare, Naruto asked, "Can you train me some more?" Quote. Tenzo let out a small smile and replied, "Of course, Naruto. One of the reasons why I let the team have the week off was so that if any of you came to me for training, I could train you. Now then, what do you say to us going over Form 5 and Form 9 of the Fox style? If you can get these and 4 other forms down by Friday, I'll give you a B rank jutsu." Naturally, Naruto jumped at the chance for more training and his application form slowly blew away in the wind. When Friday morning rolled around, Naruto had retreated to the Hokage monument. Naturally, Naruto was sitting on the Yondaime's head. He was under no delusions about what would happen when Sakura and Sasuke got to room 302 and tried to enter the Chunin exams. As soon as those two realized that they wouldn't be able to take the exams, they'd be on the warpath. Sasuke would want to flay Naruto for preventing him from testing his skill. Sakura would want to pulverize Naruto for keeping Sasuke from attending. That was why Naruto's backpack and sleeping bag were carefully hidden in the Sandame's left ear. Naruto figured that staying out of sight for a day or so should be enough for Sasuke and Sakura to cool down. After all, Tenzo did say that he'd take part of the rap and claim that he had asked Naruto to drop out. It wasn't that big of a lie since Tenzo had told Naruto that Team 7 wasn't ready. Naruto was just about to pull out one of the books he had brought along to pass the time. However, a small orange toad suddenly landed in front of Naruto and said, "Hi there. Are you Naruto Uzumaki?" Naruto blinked his eyes at the sight of the talking toad. The only reason why Naruto hadn't lost his balance was because he had already seen some weird things as a ninja. A talking toad isn't nearly as weird as a demonic fox in the gut. Naruto quickly collected his wits and replied, "Yes, I'm Naruto. Why are you looking for me?" The toad smiled and said, "Hi, my name's Gamakichi. I was summoned by Jiraiya to find you and direct you to him. So why don't you follow me?" Instead of immediately agreeing to follow Gamakichi, Naruto scratched his head and thought about the situation. Naruto didn't know anyone named Jiraiya and it would be naive to just follow a summons because it asked him to. But at the same time, Naruto thought it would be a bad idea to just brush off the summons. After all, the Yondaime had used toad summons, so they had to be loyal to Konoha. That meant that whoever Jiraiya was, he had to have close ties to the village. In the end, Naruto sighed and said, "Okay, lead the way." Gamakichi nodded his head and hopped to the cliff above the heads on the monument. Once Naruto had climbed up to the cliff ledge, Gamakichi sprinted off down the back of the hill. The spry little toad eventually led Naruto to a small canyon where several girls were playing in the river below. Naruto was starting to wonder if Gamakichi was leading him on a wild goose chase when he spotted Jiraiya kneeling behind some bushes with a spyglass fixed on the girls. Gamakichi promptly hopped onto Jiraiya's head and said, "I brought the kid, now where's my treat?" Jiraiya flicked a small piece of candy up at Gamakichi, and the greedy toad snatched it in midair with his tongue. Once Gamakichi had swallowed the treat, he vanished in a cloud of smoke. With a bit of regret, Jiraiya put away his spyglass and turned to face Naruto. He then observed Naruto for a moment and said, "At least you're not as hopeless as you were in Wave." Quote. Naruto's hands clenched into fists and the urge to yell at Jiraiya filled Naruto. Who did this guy think he was to drag him here and mock him? However, the mention of Wave stopped Naruto in his tracks and his eyes bulged out. In a low voice Naruto whispered, "It was you. You're the one who left those scrolls." A smile appeared on Jiraiya's face and he nodded his head. He then said, "That's right, kid. Glad to see that you're starting to use that space between your ears. Your skills have definitely improved since you got those scrolls." While Naruto is soaking up this praise, a small part of him wondered what the catch was. Living on the harder side of Konoha had taught Naruto that there was not such thing as a free lunch. Why was Jiraiya praising him for his progress? Even more, why did the white-haired man leave those scrolls in the first place? Naruto looked Jiraiya in the eye and asked, "Why did you leave me those scrolls? No one, not even the old man, have ever given me such a useful gift before." Jiraiya sighed and his face grew solemn. This wasn't